today. I have been so excited about this from the very moment that Dr. Eskin came and visited us and shared with us the work that she is doing. She's going to present to us today her research and her exhibit that she has curated about the Jewish families of Polk County. This is very, very, very important history. It has never been collected. This is new information, and it is a very, very exciting time for Polk County to be able to hear this wonderful story of these families that made significant impact on the development and the early economic significance of Polk County. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Eskin. She is the Associate Professor of English at Florida Southern College. She has a PhD, an MA in English from the University of Texas at Austin, and a BA in Comparative Literature from Douglas College, Rutgers University. She's been involved in religious life on the Florida Southern College campus through her work with Jewish students and helped create the Weinstein Scholar Program for students from Israel. She's an active member at Temple Emmanuel, and she founded the Temple Emmanuel Archive of Images and Oral History Interviews 2007 and 2008. She's been busy for a long time. She is a recipient of many awards at the college, the Ben and Janice Wade Outstanding Teaching Award from Florida Southern College in 2014, the Florida Southern College Faculty Volunteer of the Year 2013, 2014, 2011, 2012, and I think this is probably a really super special one. She was named Favorite Professor from the Southern Superlatives 2009, 2010. After her presentation today, she is opening her exhibit that she curated on her research on the Jewish families of Polk County. The exhibit is behind me. The doors are open. It will be on display through August 2nd. So join me in welcoming Dr. Eskin to the podium.
Hello, everyone. Let's make sure my microphone is working. Can everybody hear me all right? Yes. Yes? Good? All right. Glad to hear it. So I guess I want to start out, of course, by, I've got a cool little thing here. There we go. By thanking the people here at the museum who have been so helpful. First, Murtis Young, Maria Tripp, Jamie Jameson, Luann Mims, Stephanie the intern, I don't know her last name, so I'm calling her Stephanie the intern, and the paint crew from the county who came in and touched up the walls for us. They look so much nicer now. And Florida Southern College for their support, and my indefatigable intern, Mordecai Wellish. You will see him jump up once or twice during the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about the Temple Emmanuel Archive. So we started in 2007, and as Murtis explained, we began just collecting images and ephemera, as well as institutional documents related to Temple Emmanuel. But by 2008, it was pretty clear that we needed to expand, and so we did. We expanded to oral histories. And in 2008, I also taught my very first class. And I have a real commitment to involving students, and that includes students who are connected with Florida Southern College, which is where I teach, but also some of the students at our Sunday school, at Temple Emmanuel, and most recently, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, by involving an education major at Florida Southern, we are going to be bringing some classroom activities into the Polk County schools. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity, but I'll talk more about that in just a minute or two. The main thing for me is I want my students to learn how to listen. I want them to learn about their community. And so that was part of my motivation in creating the archive as an opportunity for me to teach. So the idea of growing up Jewish began as early as 2009. And I did my very first interview with Sandra Wolfson-Berg-Tratner in February of 2009. And there were some other interviews that were being recorded around the same time, but hers was the first one where I wanted to know what it was like to grow up here. And I, of course, had my own ideas. I will admit openly, I'm a Yankee. I was born in Philadelphia. I was brought up in not predominantly Jewish, but strongly Jewish area where I had off for the Jewish holidays and all that. And so it was very hard for me to understand what my children might be experiencing. So I came to Florida Southern College in 1999 and began teaching. I was pregnant 2 weeks after arriving. Or starting at the job. And so, wow, okay, now I'm going to have children too. And so it's been a great journey. And the people who have helped me the most are the natives here, or the near natives. So I want to talk a little bit about the people who helped me, number one, start this program, but also taught me a little bit about what it's like to not just be a child, but also raise children in this area. So I'm limiting these pictures just to those who were on the original board, but there are a lot of other people, many of whom are here today, who I wish I had put in this presentation, just so you know, okay? But Gary Rabin was the treasurer of the synagogue, and he is the one who really got me started on this project. Then his parents, Jerry and Joan, who are here today, Willie and Elaine Wolfson, who sadly are not with us today. Sam Pincus was also on that first board, and then finally Barry Friedman, who was a Southern Jew, but he was from Atlanta rather than, he was from a city. So let me talk a little bit about formalizing the Growing Up Jewish project. So as I said, I first began thinking about this back in 2009 when my daughter was 9 years old. But it really wasn't till about the fall of 2014 that I thought, this is a project. I could turn this into something, into a study. And so I applied for a sabbatical, and that sabbatical, which I took in the fall of 2015, so just this past fall, was so that I could perform interviews and apply for grants so that we could get some money to help support the project. So the goals or the parameters were that I would interview individuals who grew up, and I was defining growing up as spending at least 5 years between the ages of 7 and 18, so that they spent a significant amount of their childhood. I think 5 years between those ages is fairly significant. And I wanted to interview them about what their experiences were. And it's particularly interesting, some of the people who I interviewed who maybe didn't exactly fit that, only spent like 3 high school years here, I felt that it was worth going off my parameters in order to interview people who I thought really had something to say. So those were the parameters. So my first grant application was for the Southern Jewish Historical Society, which is a marvelous organization that began in 1979. And I wrote a grant to get transcriptions of many of these interviews. And I'll talk more about these interviews as we move forward. The second place I applied was the Florida Humanities Council, which both of these institutions did grant us money. The first one was a Langston archival grant, which is helping to support transcribing the interviews, as I explained. And then the second grant with the Florida Humanities Council is doing a few things. One of the main ones was this idea of outreach. It was a community project mini grant, and we did a presentation back in February at Florida Southern College that invited people who had grown up in Lakeland. We actually had a rabbi who was the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel between 1956 and 1958, and he came and he was part of that panel. So it was a really wonderful opportunity. And the idea was that we would talk about religious identity and inclusiveness, right? ways of building a more just and tolerant landscape for our children and, well, for all of us, right? So it also helped with funding more transcriptions and some archival consulting, which the Historical Society and History Center have helped us with. So that's been great. All right, so before I discuss families, I'm going to give you a quick Jewish Culture 101 for those of you who maybe don't have much experience in that area. Judaism is both a religion and an ethnicity or culture. So Judaism as a religion is an ancient one, right? And it involves certain rites and all of the things that we might associate with a religion. And like other religions, it has varied levels of observance, right? There are some people who are very strict or very traditional in their following of those practices, and there are some who are a little less strict, right? And a lot of that has to do with the environments in which we find ourselves, right? Especially as a minority population, we have to think about how we can be part of a society and yet still retain our sense of distinctiveness and our sense of identity. So, you know, Jews are, and whenever you make a generalization about anybody, you're going to mess up for someone, so I apologize in advance. But Jews are a pretty practical people. We also tend to be quite erudite. And so one of the things that has been interesting to me is seeing how the community, as it has grown, as it has diversified, has found ways of being as inclusive as they could be, but also tried to include themselves within the larger community, and hence this idea of my desire to put them within the context of Polk County, okay? So, let's see, I think, okay, so when I put together this exhibit, it was nearly impossible to figure out which families I was going to use, because there are a lot of families, and they're all very interesting. I tried to choose families who have been here in Polk County and maintained a presence in Polk County for an extended period of time. I also knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to talk about all 8 of these family groups within the 30 minutes that I have to speak with you today. So what I'm going to do, or what I've decided to do, is kind of introduce you to an individual who is a member of these families. And I've chosen them not at random, but to try to demonstrate how Jewish lives are probably just the same as Christian lives, in the sense that, you know, we're born, we have people we love, we have family, we have celebrations, we have, you know, we live lives, right? And so I'm going to introduce you to a few individuals for whom I have some documentation. And of course, in order to do that, whenever you talk about the Jews of Polk County, you must begin with the Wolfsons. Partly because everybody knew Willie Wolfson. I mean, if I took a show of hands here, how many people knew or knew of Willie Wolfson? That's just wonderful. That makes me so happy. So anyway, Willie was a really integral part of the community in which he lived and in which he was born. So we're going to start with Willie. Willie was born in Lakeland, Florida in 1917. He was born in a house located on Kentucky Avenue. The bathroom was out back, and his mother gave birth to he and his brothers in Lakeland. So, well, actually 2 of his 3 brothers. So let me figure out where I am here. Oh, okay. So he was the 3rd son. And I have the address here, 701 Kentucky Avenue. Willie began at Lake Morton Grammar School in 1923. He's the one He's all the way in the back. That's him. And what I think is the best way to hear about Willie's experience at Lake Morton Grammar School is to let you hear him talk about it. So we're going to watch a little video clip here.
Every Monday morning was what we call chapel or assembly. And the third floor, of course the old building's been torn down. It was a 3-story red brick building. 2 stories were classrooms, and the third floor was a big auditorium. And every Monday morning before classes, the entire student body assembled in the chapel, I presume for announcements and whatever. First time I'd ever gone, and when we filed in, I happened to be sitting at the end seat at the row where the aisle was. And the music started, and the piano started, and everybody stood up, and they started singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." Well, I stood up, of course, with everybody, and stood there. Now, my teacher with the big bun of hair on the back of her hair and the ruler in her hand, which she always carried, sees me standing there. I'm a 6-year-old kid, and she pokes me with the ruler, and she says, "Sing, you got to sing this song." I don't sing this song. And she poked me again. She said, "You got to sing it." So I quickly, what kind of excuse can I give her? I don't know the words. I knew the words because my friends all over used to sing it as we played and all, so I knew the words. I didn't think I was supposed to sing it. Down we go to the principal's office. And she says, "He won't sing in chapel." "Why won't you sing?" "You don't know the words." So the principal writes a letter to my mother, gives it to me to take home to her, to tell her to teach me the words so that next Monday I can sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers" in chapel. Well, needless to say, my mama came with me to school the next morning, and she went to see the principal, and she straightened him out. "We happen to be Jewish, and we don't sing that song." And he said, "Oh, I didn't know that." Well, he learned something.
So experiences like that were fairly common, right? For those of you who grew up here in Polk County, you know that chapel was kind of an integral part of the school experience, right? So what is one to do if one is not Christian? And it wasn't just Willie that faced this problem. There was also his sister. His sister Irene, and a lot of people don't know that Willie had a sister. There were 3 boys, and everybody always talks about the 3 Wolfson brothers, but they forget that there was a sister. Her name was Irene. She was born here in Lakeland in 1926, and she too went to school here. And I'm going to do just a short clip from her where she will tell us a little bit about the same sort of topic.
Dr. Raymond was the preacher at the Baptist Church up on McDonald Street, and his son was my age. He was born Christmas Day, and I was born Christmas Eve, the night before. And our parents were in the hospital together. I went to Vacation Bible School up on the Presbyterian Church right off Lake Mirror, because Harriet went. I went with Harriet to Vacation Bible School. Mother could sing. They had a group that did the Messiah.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And my mother sang in that choir. And they would call her from year to year to sing in that choir. But we always knew we were Jewish.
How did you feel, though, let's say you're at school and they're doing a Christian prayer? What would you do? Did you just keep silent?
Honey, I could sing "Jesus Loves Me" better than anybody else.
So you just kind of...
I did.
sang along.
I went along. That's a good expression. I went along.
And she did. She actually eventually moved to Austin, Texas. But she had such a wonderful sense of humor about the experience. And many of the Jewish children tell stories like that. But for some of them, it was more upsetting. And I think part of it just has to do with a lack of knowledge or a lack of sense that there's anybody who's different from you, especially when you're a child. And we'll get back to that topic again when I go to a different family. But I'd like to move now to the Schneiders. They moved to Polk around 1911. Their family, a maternal uncle, got here in 1911. And I'm going to talk today about Sarah Schneider. Now, Sarah Schneider was actually born in Boston, but her family, as I said, moved down here. And she wrote a history of her experiences in Florida because she spent her whole life here in Florida. She married a man named Edward Safer. And so I'm going to read from this history that she wrote. I was in 5th grade when we came to Bowling Green, Florida in 1919. Harry Brodus, her maternal uncle, set us up with a general store. My father paid him 10% on the wholesale costs of the merchandise. Of course, they knew nothing about retailing. After 3 months, my mother wrote her sister Rose that we were actually starving and urged them to come down, and together they would go to another town. Uncle Joe was a ladies' tailor in Boston, and he became a merchant in Mulberry. We moved to Lakeland in the fall of 1923 from Mulberry. I was in the 10th grade. I brought a near-perfect record to Lakeland High School. They, the officials, decided to lower my grades on the permanent record card. They couldn't believe that I deserved them. When I was named the valedictorian of the class of 1926, the principal told me, and then changed my grades. So after college, she actually, in 1931, took a job teaching in Eagle Lake, Florida. And in June of 1934, she married Edward Safer at the Lakeland Yacht Club and left Polk County. Though she and her husband stayed in Florida, her daughter Barbara actually returned to Lakeland and is still living here. So let's move now to the Friedlanders, who arrived here in 1924, in Lake Wales, actually. Edwin Friedlander was born here in July of 1931, and I'd like to read from his birth announcement. The young son, first in the Friedlander family, has been named Edwin Morris Friedlander, and Mrs. Friedlander and the babe are back at home again from the hospital. Both are feeling fine, and Harry Friedlander is doing his best to show a becoming modesty. So one of the things to notice here is that the experiences in a small town ran across religious lines and ethnic lines, that Harry Friedlander was a part of Lake Wales. And certainly this was 7 years after he had come. He was now very much established there with his store. So this one's a favorite of mine too. This is the bill from Edwin Friedlander's birth. He paid a whopping $125.10 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in the hospital. And a woman was allowed to stay in the hospital for 6 or 7 days. Amazing, isn't it? Even with a cesarean section with my daughter, I was out in like 24 hours. Isn't that crazy? Okay, sorry. But this was from the Lake Wales Hospital. Also, the next press release we get on Edwin is in June of 1932, and I quote again, above is pictured Edwin Morris Friedlander, son of Mr. and Mrs. H. Friedlander of this city. And the happy smile the young lad is wearing shows he has no depression worries confronting him. The picture was taken when Edwin Morris was 8 months old. Being the only son in the family, it is needless to say the chubby-faced little gentleman is the pride of his dad and mother's, and he looks like he was enjoying life immensely. So Ed was pretty much born to retail. His father ran Friedlanders, and in honor, in 1937, Ed is described as, quote, a sturdy, fine little chap of 6 years, for whom the new Edwin's 5 and 10-cent store was named because, as his father, Harry Friedlander, puts it, it will really be his someday. And it was. Then, in 1940, he and his sister, Evelyn, and this is from 1934, so Ed was 9, and his sister Evelyn was 16. Their father put them on a train heading to Frostproof so that they could work at the Friedlander store for their dad because the manager was on vacation for a week. So the kids got to take the train from Lake Wales to Frostproof, and apparently he would pick them up at the end of the day. But, you know, got to start those kids working earlier, right? And especially if they're related, I don't think you have to pay them. So, but our Ed is still around, and I am just amazed. So after earning his Eagle Scout badge, and that's him at the Bach Tower Gardens. He did leave Lake Wales for a little while to go to college to serve in Korea, but he fulfilled the promise that these clippings demonstrate and became Lake Wales Citizen of the Year in 1997. So, and he also is with us today. Let's move next to the Estroffs. I'm sure many of you have heard of Nathan's, right, downtown Lakeland. The Estroffs actually first arrived here in 1925. And I'm going to talk today not about one of the ones that maybe you've heard of, but instead about Tilly Barkin Estroff. Tilly was born in 1898 in New York City, but she grew up pretty much in the rural South, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama. She married Sam Estroff in Georgia, and the couple moved to Lakeland to open a store in 1925. They had a son, Melvin, who was 5 at the time, and Tilly was pregnant as she crossed state lines, and Selig was born in Lakeland in July of 1925. So, when they arrived here, they opened a store, and the way that Melvin described it was that both his parents worked very hard at the store to get it established and then eventually to expand it. So Tilly was working at the store, and she just had a baby, and I was really pleased to get this piece of documentation from her son Selig. It's a letter that she wrote in October of 1925. And she begins to her friend Mrs. Rose back in Georgia, "You must not think hard of me for not having written to you sooner. As you know, I had my hands full after arriving here, and now they're fuller than ever. But I've thought of you and family many times, especially when I rock my baby. I remember your advice about spoiling him. He is not doing so well for some reason. I just thought he had the colic and came to find out he was hungry. He is on the bottle and only weighs 10 pounds, but otherwise he is sweet as can be, full of pep and smiles freely. He takes up all my time as I have to be so careful with his feedings. Melvin is wild over him, so wild I have to keep him away for fear he will hurt him." Tilly saw her elder son, Melvin, become a bar mitzvah at the temple, which was founded in 1932. He had the first bar mitzvah, which was in 1934. And Tilly, at that time, was the vice president of the Ladies' Auxiliary for the years 1934 and 1935. But by May of 1935, she was gravely ill. The Ladies' Auxiliary notes in their official minutes, "Mrs. Slackman mentioned that we send flowers to Mrs. Estroff, who is very ill in Miami. It was suggested by Mrs. Boyer that we send a telegram of regret of her illness, and Mrs. Sklar made a motion that a night letter be sent to her. A night letter was composed and sent at this meeting." Sadly, Tilly died of breast cancer in 1935, when her children were 15 and 9. So. But She loved Lakeland, and she loved the community that she lived in, and we have a wonderful sense of what it was like to be a young mother in Lakeland at that time because of what she left behind for us. So let's go to something happier. We're going to move to the Millers now, and the example that I'm going to use is Mr. Joe Miller. Joe Miller was born in Eastman, Georgia, oh, wait a minute. I think I turned pages too soon. Yes, I did, sorry. Was born in Eastman, Georgia in 1916. He lived with his aunts and cousins after the death of his mother, especially the Slackmans, who moved to Florida in the late 1920s. He graduated from Lakeland High School in 1935. According to his wife, he had some unhappy experiences at Lakeland High School. He felt that he never fit in. This fact is particularly disturbing to Althea, as Joe was easy to be with and had a great sense of humor, a great guy. Miller played football at Lakeland High School his junior year, but when it came to the fraternities and social clubs, everything was closed to kids who were Jewish. He served during World War II, married Althea Softness in 1948, raised 3 beautiful children, one of whom is arguing a case across the street right now, and died suddenly in 1993. I know Joe's wife Althea would have liked a longer life with Joe, but she ended a discussion with me about her husband by commenting the following. We're going to listen to a short clip.
Pleasant and honest and kind, and you know, and that's the way he was, and I am very proud to be a part of who he was. Really, I am, and I'm so grateful that I met that wonderful man and that he gave me this wonderful life. I mean it. I really, really mean it.
It's wonderful.
And I am so blessed because I have such an extraordinary family. And I'm so proud of who they are and what they are, but they're all part of who my husband was. And I'm so grateful.
And here's some pictures of Joe with his family. He was a great guy. So now we move to the Rabins, and we're going to jump back in time again, this time to Nettie Goldman Rabin, who was born in 1909 in New York City. She moved to Lakeland in 1933 with her husband, Russell, her sons, Gerald, Jerry, and Leonard. Jerry told me, quote, "My mother was more or less the driving force in our family. She was always around. Whenever we needed anything, Mother was always there. She also was the religious one and kept us going to service and Sunday school and made sure that we were both bar mitzvahed and so on. Mother was probably more of a force than my father was, though Jerry did say that his father was important too. She was in her element in a kitchen, according to several accounts, but actually not right away. And we're going to listen to Jerry tell us a little bit about when she first moved to Lakeland in 1933.
My mother? My mother had a little harder time when she moved from New York to Lakeland. Like I say, her family was very religious. My mother was used to being kosher and going to services and coming to Lakeland when there was not very many Jewish families. In fact, there was just, like I say, 2 or 3, and no kosher markets. She had a little time adjusting, but she did, and she made quite a few friends, and she was one of the leaders in the temple as far as the sisterhood. She was the president of the sisterhood, and she was in Hadassah. She taught Sunday school and Hebrew school, and she was sort of a force in the temple.
Nettie Rabin was involved not just at the temple, but also in productions with the Little Theater. This is a cast picture from 1962, and there's Nettie. And I understand she was really fun at parties. This is New Year's. But she definitely was a force. Nettie and her husband Russ died within months of each other in 1974. Okay, I've made it to the last family here, and certainly not the last family, but Robin Trone Sussingham was independent from the start, born here in Lakeland, Florida. Her parents were Robert and Doris Trone. And one of the things that has been really interesting about going through her interview was listening to how she felt about her Jewish identity. So, and I quote, "I am very comfortable being Jewish in Lakeland. It's funny. Different people in my family had different experiences. I never felt self-conscious about it. I never felt different. Whereas my brother, who was only a couple years younger, told me that he would just dread when it was a Jewish holiday and we had to stay out of school. And we would have to turn in a note to the teacher. I was just thrilled to get out of school. He would dread it. He would just sweat thinking about how he would have to walk up to the teacher and hand her this note, and then she was going to know that he was Jewish and everyone was going to know. It made him feel different. My own kids are like that. They didn't like to feel different. I didn't feel different." Robin left Lakeland to take degrees at first Duke, then Georgetown. She spent a year in Israel before finishing up with a journalism degree at NYU. She married Chris Sussingham, an Air Force pilot, in 1988. The couple and their 3 children have lived around the country and the world. But back in 2011, she explained her view on religion, and I quote, "I feel like religion is a private matter. I'm not ashamed of being Jewish. I'm very happy about being Jewish. But I feel like it is private, and I feel that other people's beliefs are private. I don't believe that there should be praying at government functions like school board meetings and city council meetings, which is very popular here, because it's a private matter. I don't get the need to be so public about religious practice. I've never gotten it. Besides," and this is within the context of the conversation, she was talking about being in high school. "Besides, I was in 11th grade, and I was more worried about other things than I was about that. You know, getting a date," which she had no trouble with, as you can see. So why return to Polk? And here's how she explains it. "I really like Florida. I like the weather. We, Robin, husband Chris, and kids Joseph, Philip, and Daniel, had lived in a lot of different places. And I just realized that I wanted to set down roots in a community that I cared about. I was in junior league somewhere else, but I didn't care enough about the town to really want to volunteer that much. I discovered that I cared about Lakeland, and I would be more apt to become involved. So my husband Chris made a promise that after he retired from the Air Force, we would come back here because he knew I missed living here." And so my conclusions, which are, you know, not quite conclusions, more just some reflections, are about how interviewing all of these people, hearing all of these stories, has been really invigorating to me, both intellectually and spiritually. Oral history has the potential to improve community. We can notice others. We can respect their background, honor them, cherish them through this practice of oral history. And what I'm most proud of this, this whole project, I've got, you know, well over 100 interviews. I did over 30 of them last term alone. And what I'm most proud of is not data-driven. It doesn't have to do with the numbers of interviews or, you know, how many pictures I got. The results are personal. They're also interpersonal. I got the privilege of listening to these stories, of hearing about other people and how they remember their lives and what it is they're most proud of. But I think the thing that was most interesting to me was when they talked about just moments, you know, just moments that are part of our everyday lives, right? Our lived lives are part of a fabric, and I love the idea that I'm here speaking to other people who grew up in Polk County, because I imagine that a lot of your experiences are like these experiences, right? About relatives and friends. So how I live my life every day matters. And I need to pay attention. I want to pay attention, to listen, and to teach my children and my students about how to listen, right? How to take time and not be impatient. So losing our stories is not an academic problem. It's a cultural one. It's a spiritual one. And so this is an opportunity. We have this wonderful opportunity to honor memory. And by honoring memory, we can ensure our future. It creates an inclusive society with mutual respect. And I understand, and I think we all understand, that we cannot live in the past, but we can't have a future without one. So thank you. And